We've come now to a time for questions with Mark, and you've been sending your questions through, and some great questions coming through, so thank you for that. Feel free to keep sending them as well too. The number's there on the feedback form. Sorry, I'm getting waved at, but okay. First question. Mark, I bought your book. Can you please sign it? Is that okay?
The value goes down though when that happens. So.
All right, so grab Mark afterwards if you want to do that. Moving on to a couple other ones.
Are they all that difficult?
Well, that one that I just got just then's a little trickier, but we'll come back to that. Mark, sometimes... Oh, here we go.
There you go. Kicking in.
Mark, sometimes it's said in Christian circles that ultimately what matters is not fruitfulness, but faithfulness. How do you respond to that?
It's a tough one when you say ultimately what matters, isn't it? Because faithfulness is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So, I mean, I could answer that logically, but I suppose there's something else underneath that, potentially, which is, are we concerned about output rather than just basically our relationship with Christ? So I think that fruitfulness is a natural flowing out of our relationship with Jesus. I think it is utterly inevitable that when the Spirit of God is working in somebody, whether they're able to do something or not, then they will be fruitful. And you can see it in people who are dying, as well as people who are very, very active. But I understand the notion why people might say that faithfulness is, but I don't see it that way. I think the primary thing is that we are fruitful, and that faithfulness is clearly critical to that, but is one aspect of fruitfulness. Yeah.
I'll read this question as it is. Hi, how do you find contentment in work? For example, when you're not in the work or field you want to be in, or want to do full-time ministry?
Yeah. Most people in the world throughout history were not in work that, if you like, would self-actualize them. If you like. Most people throughout history were not doing jobs through which you might say they could fulfill their key potentials. And most people in the world today are not in those kind of roles, are they? So when Paul says to slaves, whatever you do, you can do for Jesus, he's not talking to slaves in a kind of what you might call a 19th century British understanding of slavery, or 19th century Caribbean or North American understanding of slavery. Slavery was certainly sometimes brutal, but 50% of people in the ancient world were slaves. So they actually did a whole variety of types of job. Nevertheless, what he says to those people who often don't have a choice about what they do is, whatever you do, you can do it as unto the Lord. So the question is, where ultimately does one contentment lie? Is it in the task itself? And there's certainly many joys in that. Or is it in the person you're doing it for, or the people you're doing it for? So for those of you who've, and this is not my background, but for those of you who've met people who don't have a great deal, or been to countries where people don't have a great deal, and you see the joy in a mother's face or a father's face who's able to provide for their children, regardless in a sense of what the work might be, then you realise that there are other joys in work, other than, if you like, is this particular job enabling me to fulfil all my potentials? At the same time, there is that yearning, isn't there? And, you know, let's not deny that sometimes there are things that we really like to do and that we feel like we come alive when we do them. And I think, you know, if that was a pastoral question, if you like, so what do you do in that kind of a situation? One of the things I would say is on the one hand, embrace the work you've got. Be as good at it as you possibly can. Engage in it. Try to understand in what ways it does contribute to the mission of God. Does it bring order? Does it provide? Does it bring joy to other people? Are there benefits to it? Can you feel, in a sense, good about the product, the services that you provide? In some places it's obvious. You're a doctor, you're healing people, it's obvious. Other places you're thinking, I'm just clearing up rubbish. Well, you're also preventing disease. You're also making the world a more beautiful place just by doing that. So I think there's something about seeking to understand the benefits of what you do. And then, if you like, there is also so the contribution to God's bigger mission. And then there is the contribution, particularly if you have the opportunity to be working with people to bless those people. I know one youngish man, he was 24 at the time, and he was bored in his job, as in very bored, and he was totally overqualified for the role that he had, which was working in a factory, in a minor role in a factory, if you like, if that's the right way to put it. And he was bored. Have I told you he was bored? So he was very, very, very bored. Has it become boring yet, telling you how bored he was? So he prayed to the Lord God, King of the Universe, asked him for a job, and the Lord God of the Universe was curiously silent. So then he went to his life group or cluster group or subatomic quark or whatever it is that you call them here, and he said, would you pray for me? So his small group prayed for him, and then nothing happened. And then he said, well, I'll go to the pastor and we'll get the church to pray. So it's a church of about 80 people, I think, so the whole church is praying that this guy gets a job. He doesn't get a job. And then he met somebody from LICC, and we solve all problems. and my colleague, Neil, said, so if you've prayed, your small group has prayed, and the church has prayed, and you've all prayed that God would give you a new job, and he hasn't, what does he want you to do there? So is there something he wants you to do in that place at this time? That is, if you like, beyond your in-skilling at this stage. And then he quoted Jeremiah 29:7, seek the peace and prosperity. And the guy said, do you mean I'm meant to be a blessing there? Okay, I can do that. So he starts getting in 15 minutes early for his shift, starts meeting the people coming off shift, going on shift, starts to pray for people without them knowing, and then praying for people with them knowing, and so on. Suddenly he's got a ministry. He's quite excited. Is his job boring? Yes. Is his day boring? No. So it doesn't make something dull necessarily easy to deal with. So I think on the one hand there's embracing it, and on the other hand there's sometimes the question, and I don't mean this as a sop, I mean clearly, some of us would like to be opera singers and we're just not good enough. We'd love to do it, but we're just not good enough, and sometimes opportunities do not come to us. But there is something about understanding what is it about that thing that I really would love to do? What is it about it that is the thing that I'd really love to do? And then trying to find a way to express that thing that I'd really love to do in another way. So supposing what you really love about, say I want to be an interior designer and I don't seem to, what I really love is creating beauty. Well, I may not be able to do that professionally, but I can put biscuits on a plate in a more lovely way. I can lay a table more beautifully. I can sprinkle the watercress as they did on the top of the salmon in a rather nice way. I can just have this dollop of red next to the white and the brown chocolate, the circles spread at particular angles on the plate. If you didn't get the chocolate pudding, come again, because it's worth it. So what's in you that you can find an expression to do? We do know, however, that people are happiest when they get to do something that they do best every day, that they're motivated to do. And it's great if you can. It may not be all of your job. So I don't want to dismiss the grief of that, but I think there are other goals. Yeah.
Another question. The 6 M's. When you live out points M1 to M5, how do you make sure that your colleagues don't just think you're a good, pious person? What I used to do is I got a big sign and I put, I am a Christian on your knees, sinners. Yeah. So the question here is, it's kind of a, if I can come at this, step back from it a moment. We walk by the Spirit and we live by the Spirit. So the question when we go into any place is, are we sensitive to the way the Spirit is moving? So when people say, take your faith to work, what do we actually mean by that? I think what we mean is, take our trust, our living trust in the living God, take that into the places where you go. What does that mean? Well, when I go to work, I'm trusting that God has gone before me.
I'm trusting that he loves every person in that place. I'm trusting that in some sense he wants the best for that organisation. I'm trusting that he's going with me. I'm trusting in his timing. I'm trusting in an awful lot of things. I'm not just looking for an opportunity to do something here. I'm trusting that he's at work. Now, when you go in with that, then there's some pressure off you. And so then you're praying, Lord, show me who you want to be, how you want me to be, when you want me to be it. Show me who you want me to share with. So to give you an example of what I mean by that from a context which we sometimes use to sort of beat people up, which is the persecuted church. So the persecuted church is sometimes used, if you like, as a stick to beat Westerners up. Look, our brothers and sisters are in these terrible situations and look at their courage. Indeed. But how does the persecuted church do evangelism? So here's a story of a North Korean woman who was in a rehabilitation camp, in other words, a place where they're seeking to reprogram her because she's a Christian, and she's obviously escaped. This is why we know this story. And so God says to her, I want you to share the gospel with people around you. And she says, excuse me, it's rather dangerous. I could get killed. Now, there is scriptural precedent for asking these kind of questions. Ananias is sent to the murderer Saul, and Ananias says, excuse me, he's been killing people. Are you sure? So God says to her, I will show you who, I will show you how, and I will show you when. So where is the question coming from? So in the end, he did show her who and how, and the where was in the latrines, because it was the one place none of the guards could possibly go because it was too disgusting. So in a curious way, the aroma of Christ was filling the latrines. So I suppose what I'm trying to say around this question is that we go with intentionality and prayerfulness, and we ask that the Lord would open the doors and give us the opportunities to know when to speak. Because sometimes if we speak too early, we, in our own strength or flesh, we put some people off. They might be ready in 3 months, and we shouldn't have imposed it on them. I'm absolutely not saying that we shouldn't be purposeful and intentional here. So the answer to the question might be, how do we stop that happening? We're doing 1 to 5 wonderfully. We continue to pray that God will give us opportunities to say something specific in the context of growing relationship with our colleagues.
Great. It's another question that I guess flows on from that a little bit. Mark, you saw people come to faith in your workplace. Can you tell us more of the stories of how that happened? And I'll just add to that that you had the caveat at the beginning that this was stories over many, many years, and it's important for us to have that view.
Well, the truth of some of these stories is deeply embarrassing. So at the time, I was 26 years old, and I was an Englishman in New York, and I was single. And I was surrounded by, frankly, just lovely women. And, I mean, just one of those things in pretty much every way you can imagine. I just, lovely personalities, lovely people, and all this kind of stuff. And most of them were not Christians. So I prayed fervently for their souls, as you do. When I went to theological college, I came up with a term for this. It's called hormonic evangelism. And frankly, it was the only kind I was ever good at. And so the first person who became a Christian, in a sense, through my hormonic prayerfulness, was a really spectacular young woman called Jill. And when I first met her, she was working for me. She wasn't a Christian, and she was going out with somebody else. 3 strikes. This is not good news, is it? But I prayed quite a lot for her, and as you do. And I think every day for about a year and a half, actually. It's somewhat to my shame, actually, at one level, this story, because it was totally, at one level, totally self-interested. But the Lord blessed it, I think. And so I asked her once, would she be interested in, reading the Bible, in the morning. So we would come in once a week and read the Bible in my office for 15 minutes, a psalm or a bit of John's Gospel or something like that. So we did that. And then she started to go to church, and she had started to read the Bible herself. It was Matthew's Gospel. And she went to a lot of different churches, and every church she went, didn't matter whether it was Anglican or Baptist or Methodist, they were always doing Matthew's Gospel. And it began to spook her. It's like, God knows what I'm reading. And so there were lots of little incidents like this. And then one day I shared the gospel more directly with her and asked her if she wanted to become a Christian, and she said yes, but that's not when she became a Christian. She was just making me happy at that particular point. And then she stopped working for me, and then I told her how I felt about her, and she said, "On your bike, no way, Jose, in your dreams," which of course I didn't believe at the time because the Lord had told me, etc., etc. But she escaped. But she did become a lovely Christian woman and married a nice guy. I did okay. In the end, I did okay. But you know what I mean? It was deeply painful, frankly. But she came to a Bible study that I did, an evangelistic Bible study in my flat. I had a number of those. I invite people over. It was like Christianity Explored and Alpha in the early days. I didn't know what I was doing. I invited people for supper. We did a chapter of John's Gospel. 1 hour, absolute maximum. Ask any question you like. I'm not answering any of them. We're just talking about the text. If it's in the text, great. If it's not. And now there's somebody else has done that effectively really, really well, and the one-to-one series. And she came along to that and then met I invited a woman from the church to come with me. And so she took all the women off from that. And I was left with the blokes. So that was her, and then we were working with a guy called David Warden, who was not a Christian, and he was one of the great, great leaders, actually, I've ever met. Absolutely brilliant man. And she and I prayed for him, really, constantly, and she read the Bible with him, I read the Bible with him, and he became a Christian and led his family in that direction, so that was another one. But, that's like 2.5 years for Jill, and then another year for David, and some of the people who came to that Bible study then Jill invited some of her friends, and one of them became a Christian, and other people were prayed for, and I met with a Catholic a lot who was a believing Catholic, and he was probably the most supportive person around praying for that. So yeah, a few things. Yeah.
Very good. It's probably more than we expected to get, but that was very interesting.
Sorry about that. Okay, yes.
Someone texted.
Too much information.
Someone texted through while you were answering there, so his flirt to convert a mission strategy. But we'll take that as a comment. The 3 things I got out of that.
Good idea.
The importance of prayer, reading the Bible with other people, and relationships as well too. Yeah. So let me make this the final question.
Thank you for summarising that so much better.
My background was radio journalism, so we had to distill it down to 3 points and give no substance.
Very good. Plenty of substance there.
Last question. Sometimes I go to dinners like this and get really excited about my work and want to change, but a week later I'm back to my old slump. Can you give me one tip, one thing that I can perhaps do in the week ahead to make changes that are going to last in terms of my work?
Yeah. It may not help you, but is there someone here tonight who you could say to, even if you've come on your own and you don't know anybody, because they're friendly people, could you say, this is the thing I would like to do this week. Here's my text number or my Instagram account or whatever, and I'd like to really try to do this. And would you call me in a week's time and ask me if I've done it? And would you mind praying for me once this week? That. I think for most of us, we need a buddy. We just need a buddy. We're not meant to do this. Often we're on our own there, but I think in a sense, accountability, a friend to cheer us on, pick us up, is, I think, the key. I had that, and I think that makes a huge, huge, huge difference. So it's tough. I don't know in Australian culture whether it's tough. It's a little bit tough in English culture to kind of say, I need you to help me with something. I don't know if that's the case in Australian culture, but it is in mine. But it makes all the difference long term to do that. And you don't have to be best friends with that person forever. It can be for a week or a month, but actually finding a buddy is I think, pretty important. Yeah.
Excellent. Would you please thank Mark Greene?
Thank you. Thank you.